pace. Because we focus more on numbers than making disciples. We have this many people. I served in a church like that. It's shallow. It's shallow Christianity. And how it applies to our lives personally is God gives us resources to grow deep. He gives us the Word. He gives us Sunday mornings. He gives us Monday nights. All these help root us into God's Word so that when life gets hard, guess what? Life is going to get hard. How many people have lost their job in the last several years? Life gets hard. Very hard. How many people have gone through a divorce? How many people have lost a loved one? How many people? You name it, the list goes on and on. When these times come, we are rooted in the faith so that we have God's strength to draw on. That's deep faith. My prayer for Grace Church is that we just don't make converts. That we actually make disciples. Just like Jesus said, He says, go and make disciples. That's my prayer for Grace Church. That's why our vision statement says that we are going to reproduce passionate followers of Jesus. Those that are rooted and deep in the faith. It's intentional discipleship. It's intentional to grow in our faith. Not in the four walls, that's a part of it, but also to grow in our homes, on our own. That's a part of growing a deep faith. That's why we have the spiritual disciplines in our lives. So God is speaking. God is talking to us this morning. We have to hear with our hearts. The next soil type was the thorns. And the thorns are distracted parts of our hearts. The thorns are distracted parts of our hearts. And this is what He says, Jesus says in verse 7, when He told the crowds. And some fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up with, and choked at the good seed. The thorns grew up and choked. And they're distracted hearts. Jesus explains it this way to His disciples. And as for those that fell among the thorns, they are those who hear, but they go on their way. And they are choked by the cares and of the riches and of the pleasures of life. And their full fruit does not mature. It's funny, thorns are a form of weeds. If you go out into a field, there's some weeds that have thorns on it, isn't it? You know the amazing thing about weeds? They grow everywhere. They grow, and you see, they don't grow with any water. They don't grow with any effort. They don't grow with any fertilizer. They just grow. And they grow fast, don't they? Weeds are all over the place. They spring up everywhere. And Jesus likens our walk, our hearts, with weeds that grow in our lives. And he looks at three different types. He says there's the cares or worries of the world. There's worries, things that consume us, that we're just completely worried. We're worried about our money. We're worried about our job. We're worried about this. We're worried about that. The list goes on and on and on and on of things that we can worry about. And the amazing thing about worry is most of the things that we worry about don't come to pass. Have you ever noticed that? We worry, oh, this is going to happen, and it never does. And we get all worked up. We get all stressed out. It's a weed in our life. It's worries. Or he talks about riches in our lives. Materialism. We have to have a bigger and better thing. Or we have to have the bigger house, the bigger car, the better car. And when we do, we don't allow God to speak in our lives. When we're constantly chasing after the bigger and better thing. Just the other day, it was funny because the TV came, commercial came on, and it was the Droid phone. Have you seen the commercials of this? And it was really cool because yesterday we went to Thomas Day Out, and there was a guy in line, and he had one. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I'm like, oh, that'd be really cool to have. And it was a Verizon commercial, and we have Verizon. And I looked at Ella, and I'm like, the Droid phone, that's pretty cool. And you know what? Verizon's getting the iPhone this summer. This is good news. And she looked at me, she goes, what in the world's wrong with your BlackBerry? And we get wrapped up into that all the time. We get wrapped up into that all the time, and it doesn't allow God to speak in our lives. And we become consumers of Christianity when we should be contributors to be building the kingdom. And so there's these weeds in our hearts. The last is pleasures. There's nothing wrong with pleasures in life. I enjoy taking a family vacation. Yesterday was a day with the family. I enjoyed that. I don't know who had more fun a day with Thomas, the kids, or Kelly and I. It was fun. There's nothing wrong with that. God created fun. But if that is all we're seeking after, it really distracts us from the cross and Jesus working in our lives. So what do we do with weeds in our lives? Anything that distracts us from God working or God speaking in our lives, what do we do with them? We do with them exactly what we do if we get a bunch of weeds popping up in the cracks of our driveways or in our lawn. We can squirt it with Roundup, but most people get in there and they pull them. You pull these weeds out of your life. That's what you do. Things distracting you from God and God speaking and working in your life, pull that weed out. Pull it out. See, God is speaking. He's speaking to you right now. And we have to listen with our hearts. The last soil is the good soil. The good soil is willing parts of our hearts. Willing parts of our hearts. This is the goal of the Christian life. We want our hearts, our whole heart, to be willing parts for God to use, don't we? And this is what Jesus tells the crowd. This is, and some fell into good soil, and it grew, and it yielded 100-fold. As he said these things, he called out to the crowd. He who has an ear, let him hear. The willing heart produces fruit in our lives as we go and we share the gospel of Christ with our families, our co-workers, our neighbors. When we have willing hearts, He's the one that's going to bring in the crop. God is. We just have to be faithful in sharing it. Jesus talks to the disciples. As for that in the good soil, they are those who, hearing the word, they hold it fast in an innocent and good heart. And they bear fruit with patience. That's the goal. I want my heart to be a willing heart. All of it. Not just bits and pieces. Because we give, when we look at our whole heart, we give Him bits and pieces. We don't give Him our whole